It sounds like the monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good.
Breaking. William's first appearance as king stuns the world. Camilla's family is speechless. The doors of Buckingham Palace have witnessed centuries of history. They have opened for queens and closed behind kings. They have held the weight of wars, coronations, and quiet revolutions that reshaped nations. But on this particular morning, when those doors swung wide and Prince William stepped forward into the light as King William V, something unmistakable moved through the crowd gathered beyond the gilded gates. A stillness. Not the reverent hush of ceremony, but the particular silence of a world realizing that a page had genuinely turned, and that the chapter now beginning would look nothing like the one before it. Those present described his bearing as different from anything they had anticipated. Royal observers, journalists, and longtime monarchy watchers had spent years speculating about what kind of King William would become. Would he carry the emotional warmth of his mother, Diana? Would he adopt the careful, consultative style of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II? Would he echo the deeply personal and spiritual approach that defined his father's reign? The answer, it appears, was none of the above, and all of them, compressed into something sharper, more deliberate, and far more modern than the institution had seen in living memory. He walked not as a man stepping into a role, but as a man finally allowed to do publicly what he had been doing privately for years. For Camilla's family, her son Tom Parker Bowles, her daughter Laura Lopez, and the grandchildren who had quietly grown accustomed to a certain proximity to palace life, the moment carried a different kind of weight entirely. The warmth extended by King Charles, rooted in decades of personal devotion to Camilla and a genuine fondness for those she loved, had always been a personal gift rather than an institutional guarantee. William's arrival at the center of the monarchy's gravity served as a quiet but unmistakable reminder of that distinction. What had felt permanent was, in fact, always conditional, and the conditions had now changed. There's a certain quality to moments that define eras. Those who live through them often describe a feeling they could not name at the time, a sense that the air itself had shifted, that something had rearranged beneath the surface of ordinary events. The morning of William's first public appearance as king carried that quality in abundance. The crowd outside the palace gate stretched further than protocol usually demands. People had traveled from across Britain and beyond, drawn by an instinct that this was not simply another royal occasion to be photographed and catalogued. Flags were held but rarely waved. Voices dropped to murmurs. Even the persistent London wind seemed to pause. And when William appeared, the response was not the jubilant roar that greets celebrations, but something deeper, a collective intake of breath that lasted several seconds before dissolving into applause. He was dressed with characteristic restraint. No excessive ornamentation, no theatrical display of inherited symbols. What he wore communicated precisely what his posture confirmed, that authority, in this new reign, would not announce itself through spectacle but demonstrate itself through presence. Observers noted that he moved through the gathered dignitaries and officials with a calm that was not coldness and a focus that was not unkindness. It was simply clarity. He knew exactly where he was going. He knew exactly what he intended to do. And the room, instinctively, reorganized itself around that certainty. Senior palace staff who have served across multiple reigns described the atmosphere that morning as unlike any transition they had experienced. Not chaotic, not overwhelmed by grief or adjustment. Instead, it felt, and this word surfaced repeatedly in their accounts, inevitable, as though the palace had been quietly rehearsing for this particular morning for a very long time. To understand why William's first appearance carried such extraordinary weight, it is necessary to understand what preceded it, a long, careful, and largely invisible preparation that began gathering momentum when King Charles's health challenges first became publicly known in early 2024. From that point forward, William began absorbing responsibilities with a steadiness that impressed even those closest to the institution. He stepped into engagements his father could no longer comfortably manage. He began shaping decisions at levels of palace governance that had previously remained above his formal reach. He sat in rooms where institutional strategy was determined and made his views known with a directness that surprised some who had expected deference. He was not, it quickly became clear, content to wait passively at the edges of power while the monarchy navigated an uncertain period. He intended to be useful. He intended to be prepared. And he intended, when the moment arrived, to be ready in every sense that mattered. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was central to this preparation in ways that were rarely visible from the outside. Those with knowledge of the couple's private working relationship describe her as the steadying force behind much of what William undertook during this period. Her approach to royal duty, methodical, deeply researched, emotionally intelligent, and always oriented toward genuine public impact rather than symbolic gesture, shaped not only her own work but the framework within which William increasingly operated. She had built, over more than a decade of marriage and public service, an understanding of the monarchy's relationship with ordinary people that went beyond protocol and instinct. It was grounded in lived experience, careful observation, and a commitment to purpose that resonated with the public in ways palace advisors had rarely seen matched. Her own health journey, following her cancer diagnosis and the treatment that followed, added another dimension to the picture. Her return to public duties carried a quiet dignity that drew respect across political lines, cultural divides, and generational differences. People who had not previously paid close attention to the royal family found themselves moved by the steadiness she displayed. And within the palace, those who worked alongside had described a woman who had emerged from that experience with a sharper sense of priority and an even deeper commitment to the work she believed the monarchy could meaningfully do in a changing world. Together, William and Catherine had spent years not merely preparing for kingship and queenship in the ceremonial sense, but constructing a shared vision for what the institution could become. Smaller in its formality, larger in its relevance, more honest in its communication, and more genuinely connected to the lives of the people it serves. That vision, shaped quietly across years of shared work and private conversation, was now stepping into the full light of public life for the very first time. And those watching closely could see that it had not been assembled hastily. Every element of it bore the marks of long, serious thought. What distinguished William's first appearance as king was not drama or confrontation. It was something more quietly powerful than either, the demonstration of an authority that required no performance because it had already been earned. Longtime royal correspondents who have covered the monarchy for decades noted that there is typically a period of visible adjustment at the beginning of a new reign. Decisions are tentative. Advisors are consulted on matters that might later be handled directly. The new monarch moves carefully, conscious of the symbolic weight of every early choice. William appeared to skip this phase entirely, not out of arrogance, but because the groundwork had already been laid. The period of visible transition had been conducted privately, over years, beneath the surface of public events. What the world witnessed was not a beginning but a confirmation. His approach to those gathered at the palace that morning reflected this deeply. He did not perform accessibility or warmth in the way royal occasions sometimes demand. He was direct, attentive, and purposeful in a way that felt genuinely natural rather than carefully rehearsed for the cameras. Those he addressed reported afterward that he engaged with genuine focus, asking real questions, offering considered responses, and moving through conversations with the efficiency of someone who values both other people's time and his own. Senior aides described his leadership style as fundamentally different from models the palace had operated under previously, where earlier approaches had often favored consultation to the point of prolonged deliberation. William's instinct is toward clarity of purpose and efficiency of execution. He is said to ask, regarding any proposed course of action, what outcome it is genuinely intended to achieve, and if the answer is unclear, to push back firmly until it becomes clear. For those connected to Camilla through family or through the networks built during King Charles's reign, the implications of this transition are both real and deeply significant. It would be too simple to frame this as conflict or hostility. Palace insiders are careful to avoid such language, and the reality is more nuanced than simple friction between individuals. What has changed is structural rather than personal. The access and warmth extended to Camilla's wider family during Charles's reign was always rooted in his personal devotion to her and his sincere desire to build a life that felt genuinely shared. He welcomed those she loved into spaces that the institution itself had no formal mechanism for accommodating. That generosity was real and it was meaningful, but it was also his gift to give, rooted in who he was and how he personally chose to inhabit his role. It was never written into the architecture of the institution itself. William's approach to the monarchy is more institutional by nature. His decisions about who participates in what capacity, who attends which events, and whose council shapes which choices are made through a lens of institutional purpose rather than personal affection. This does not make him colder than his father. It makes him different. And that difference has real consequences for those whose positions depended on the personal rather than the structural. Those close to Camilla's family have acknowledged, in conversations reported through palace sources, that the adjustment has been significant. Invitations that were once routine have become uncertain. Spaces that were once comfortably inhabited are now navigated with greater caution. The easy familiarity of access to palace corridors and inner circle gatherings has given way to something more formal and more contingent on demonstrable relevance to the institution's current priorities. This is not a story of exile or punishment. It is the more ordinary and perhaps more universal story of what happens when the person who extended a particular kind of generosity is no longer in a position to do so, and the institution moves forward under someone whose affections and priorities are differently organized. Any serious account of William's transition to the throne must grapple honestly with the role Catherine has played in shaping it, not as a supporting figure, but as a co-architect of the vision now being realized. Her influence operates quietly, which has sometimes led observers to underestimate it. She does not seek attention for her contributions to decisions. She does not position herself in front of cameras at moments designed to establish credit or precedent. But those who work closely with the couple are consistent in their description of a partnership in which her perspective carries genuine weight on questions ranging from public communication strategy to the management of institutional relationships at the highest levels. Her background, growing up outside the formal structures of aristocracy and royalty, navigating ordinary life before her marriage brought her into one of the world's most scrutinized families, gives her a point of reference that few insiders rarely possess. She understands, in ways that are difficult to manufacture through palace briefings or public consultations, how the monarchy is perceived by people who do not follow royal news closely and who form their impressions quickly and largely through emotional rather than analytical response. Her relationship with Camilla, long managed through the careful diplomatic distance that palace culture has perfected over generations, has reportedly grown more complex as William's authority has grown more definitive. The shift in power has made the maintenance of that careful distance simultaneously more important and more difficult. What was once a managed tension between two households with overlapping but distinct interests has become something that requires more active navigation as the boundaries between those interests become more clearly defined. Observers inside the palace describe a dynamic in which both sides are adjusting in real time, recalibrating expectations and protocols against a landscape that is shifting faster than either anticipated. The monarchy that William is shaping will look different from the ones that preceded it, not unrecognizably so, but differently enough to matter. Shorter, more accessible ceremonies, fewer but more meaningful public engagements, a communication style that prioritizes honesty over polish, a working structure that values outcomes over processes, a relationship with the public built on demonstrated purpose rather than assumed loyalty. These are not radical departures from royal tradition. They are, in many ways, a return to what the monarchy's most enduring periods of public trust have always rested on, the genuine sense that it is working for something beyond its own continuation. George, as heir apparent, is growing up in a household where these values are not abstract but practical and daily. The family environment William and Catherine have constructed is one in which the responsibilities of the crown are discussed honestly, the expectations of public service are understood from an early age, and the question of what the monarchy is genuinely for is treated as one worth continuously asking. For those watching from outside the palace walls, and for those within them still adjusting to the new order, The picture that is emerging is of a monarchy that intends to earn its place in British life rather than simply occupy it. Whether that ambition will be fully realized across the years of a long reign remains to be seen. What is already clear is that the intention is serious, the preparation has been extensive, and the first impression left on the world by King William V was one that will not quickly fade from the memory of those who witnessed it. The silence that fell over Camilla's family in that first extraordinary moment was not simply the silence of shock. It was the silence of recognition, the particular quiet that falls when something you perhaps always knew but never quite allowed yourself to fully believe finally becomes undeniably real. The world had turned. The palace had a new center of gravity, and the long reign of King William V had quietly, powerfully, and unmistakably begun.